Hello again. Following Africa's spectacular showing at the FIFA World Cup, the Confederation of Africa Football President Patrice Motsepe has called for a meeting of reflection on this milestone. Morocco shone the spotlight on continental football by finishing fourth, an extraordinary feat and a first for an African team in the history of the competition. Newzroom Afrika's Vuyo Maqoba is attending that press conference in Sandton. So, Vuyo, will France be there as well? I kid. But just remind us, rather, of Africa's showing during the tournament.
Certainly a milestone that is going to be remembered as far as on the Christmas tables. That's what's going to be creating conversation still for the coming weeks. And that's because of what African teams were able to do at this World Cup. I mean, in the previous World Cup, there has been some of our teams that have tried to go further than the quarterfinals. But this time around, only Morocco was able to reach that milestone, becoming the first team from the African continent to reach the semi-finals of the FIFA World Cup for the first time in the history of the tournament. And of course, they went to play as far as the third place playoff, where they were then beaten by Croatia, unfortunately, to finish fourth at the tournament. In itself, that is a milestone from Africa, or for African teams. And this is one that, of course, the Confederation of African Football will then be discussing, or will then try to take a leaf from, to look into the future of how the African teams need to perform at future events. Of course, it will need to come with a lot of support, but as we are meeting today here in Sandton, that's one of the things that we are hoping will certainly come out. We are thinking that CAF would want to take this as a blueprint for African teams to say, whenever we go to major events, the next one being 2026, this is how African teams will need to perform. Of course, this time around, we only had 5 teams, with Tunisia finishing in the last 16, and the 3 others only not able then to pass the group stages. But then Morocco, of course, being the one that goes as far as the third place playoff. On my right ear right now, I'm seeing CAF President Danny Jordan, who has just walked in now. He's going to be part of course, the seating and this press conference. And I'm guessing this needs to come down from, African teams, but also draw down to as far as South Africa as well, in terms of, one, not just qualifying for this global showpiece, but going as far as doing well. In the next World Cup, just in closing, we're going to have 9 teams from the African continent. So that means a further or extended opportunity for African team to do good at this global showpiece.
Just out of curiosity, why do we have such little representation in terms of teams from the continent at a World Cup?
I mean, it's a dependence in terms of the spaces that have been located, of course, for the different continents, being Europe getting a bigger piece in terms of representation from the previous years, how the national teams have been able to perform. So, of course, Africa has only received 5 in the past years, and in this time around, we had the likes of Senegal, Morocco, Tunisia, Cameroon being part of the teams, and Ghana that were representing Africa at the showpiece. And like I mentioned earlier, we're then getting that extension of 9 teams, and that's because there's an extension of the World Cup as a showpiece in itself, where they're moving from 32 teams to 48 teams. So it then has further opened up a few slots for the African continent.
What to expect from the president of CAF?
A lot of talk, of course, like I mentioned earlier, regarding the blueprint of what, of course, Morocco has done at the showpiece. I think it has brought a lot of motivation to the rest of the continent to say, listen, we can go to a World Cup and do good. This is what Morocco has done. But also at the same time, him being able to highlight some of the things that will need to be done to make sure that our African team represent very, very well at this tournament. There's a lot of work that Morocco had to do to make sure that they reach such a milestone at the showpiece, and it dates back as far as 10 years when they invested millions and millions in football and building sort of football centers, I mean, that were catering for the national teams. And they didn't only cater for the men's national team, they also catered for the women's national team. We saw recently earlier on that Banyana winning the WAFCON tournament, but they were beating Morocco, the women's national team of Morocco. So it just shows that the efforts that Morocco Morocco has put in, and the money that they've put in and the investments that they've put in, didn't just cater for the male teams. They also catered for the women's team. So it's something that dates back to 10 years ago. And that's the other thing that then the other national teams will need to read from, to say it doesn't only start now. It needs to start. It dates a long time back, and there's a lot of investments that need to go in. So that's what needs to come out of today. And of course, looking further to 2026 to say, how do we make sure that our teams really perform well at this continental football? And of course, it will need to start with the Africa Cup of Nations. The Africa Cup of Nations is only in 2024. It will be hosted in Ivory Coast. That's the starting point where sort of the national teams, the African national teams, will sort of pit themselves, against themselves, to see how good they do, so that in 2026 they know where to strengthen up. So those are the little conversations that we are expecting CAF President Patrice Motsepe will be able to talk about today.
Absolutely. Do we know if the 5 teams that actually took part in the tournament will be represented at that meeting today?
Not sure as yet, but as I mentioned, that because the press conference is only starting at 2 p.m. and only the delegates will be drifting in now. I mentioned a CAF president had just walked in now, and I'm guessing he's going to meet with the CAF president. I'm expecting, of course, a lot of media, and not just South African media, because this briefing has of course been opened up to global media as well. Some will be joining in from the Zoom session, but I've already seen some from Senegal, one of our colleagues from Senegal, who's actually present here. So I'm expecting a lot of media. I am expecting a lot of delegates, even from the African teams, to be represented today. And I'm expecting majorly from maybe a delegate from the Morocco team as well to be here to just speak on behalf of this milestone that the Atlas Lions were able to do at this Qartar showpiece.
Thank you.